Towards the close of the 6th century BC, the vast Persian Empire encompassed lands from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River and from Upper Egypt to the Aral Sea. Its power appeared boundless until 499 BC, when the Greek city-states of Asia Minor rose in revolt against the rule of King Darius. Guided by Aristagoras, the despot of Miletus, the insurgents stormed Sardis, the heart of the Persian satrapy, and torched its sacred temples. Such a defiant act was destined for retribution. Years later, in the spring of 480 BC, King Xerxes, Darius's son, marched towards Athens with an army of unprecedented size. His naval force was formidable, and his resolve was absolute. He sought to avenge the indignities suffered at Sardis and the later defeat at Marathon, both events from his father's time. Yet, he held a further goal: to conquer the Greeks and absorb their lands into his dominion, creating a new Persian province. When word of this reached Sparta, one of its two monarchs, Leonidas, made a choice that would alter the trajectory of history. He resolved to sacrifice his own life, along with those of his personal bodyguard, to halt the invading force at the pass of Thermopylae, the natural corridor into central Greece. Spartan culture was defined by three core pillars: its system of education, its military structure, and its deep-seated piety. This final element frequently constrained the operational readiness of its armies. A prime illustration of this was in the summer of 490 BC, when the Spartan military responded too late to Athens' plea for aid in the Battle of Marathon. The cause for the delay was their inability to interrupt the sacred festival of Karaniae, dedicated to Apollo, as doing so would have been an act of sacrilege. In that summer of 480 BC, the Greek cities, preparing to confront the Persian threat, convened at the Temple of Poseidon in Corinth. There they swore a sacred vow, giving birth to what would become known as the Hellenic League. Though they were outnumbered, their plan was straightforward. They needed to advance to one of the tight mountain passes the Persians would be forced to traverse. Only there could they stand a chance against the immense enemy force. Leonidas argued his case before the Spartan authorities, but the Karanian festival once again proved to be an obstacle. He was granted only a special permission to take his personal guard, a contingent of 300 elite Spartans. For him, this was more than a duty to his state. It was a personal sacrifice that promised eternal glory. Religious belief was also a major factor in this choice. It is told that the oracle at Delphi had informed a Spartan delegation that for them to avoid the Persian occupation of Lacedaemonian lands, one of their two kings had to perish. Upon hearing this prophecy, Leonidas ensured that he, and not his co-king Leotychides, would fulfill this destiny. It would mark the first time a Spartan king fell in battle. By this point, the Persian Empire had already conquered Thrace and Macedonia through the campaigns of General Mardonius in 492 BC. This meant that upon leaving his territories, Xerxes would first pass through Thessaly, where local aristocrats had chosen to aid his passage. Consequently, the most strategic location for resistance was the pass of Thermopylae, situated at Thessaly's southern edge. The pass of Thermopylae lay on the coast of the Malian Gulf, across from the northwestern point of the island of Euboea. Here, the southern part of the Pindus mountain range, Greece's true spine, came so near to the shoreline that it created an extremely narrow passage between the mountains and the sea. In ancient times, before rivers deposited sediment that widened the area, this pass was a gorge approximately 1,300 meters long, with a width ranging from just 15 to 30 meters. Leonidas counted on this constriction to neutralize the Persians' numerical superiority, as it would stop them from deploying their full force. Furthermore, having a sheer cliff on the right flank protected a key vulnerability of the Greek phalanx, since hoplites carried their shields on their left arms. The most critical reason, however, was that this location allowed for a combined land and sea strategy. The strait between Euboea's northern coast and the mainland was a perfect arena for the Greek triremes, which could engage the Persian fleet there and block them from attacking the Hellenic army's rear. The selection of the 300 Spartans to accompany Leonidas was meticulous. The men composing the royal bodyguard were called Aechipius, or knights, though they fought as hoplites in the phalanx's center next to their king. This unit consisted of 300 members, selected through a rigorous competition among Spartans aged 20 and 29 years old, who had to prove their courage, weapon proficiency, and peak physical condition. But the men chosen for Thermopylae shared something else that set them apart. They all knew they were embarking on a suicide mission. The code of honor instilled by the Agioge, the Spartan educational system, taught that nothing was more disgraceful than being labeled a coward, a fate that awaited anyone who returned alive from a defeat. A survivor would have his cloak marked with colored patches, be ostracized from the communal messes, lose his citizenship rights, and have no hope of marrying a woman of equal standing. In fact, two of Leonidas's chosen men, Pantiates and Aristodemus, survived due to various circumstances, and neither could endure the shame. Pantiates hanged himself upon his return to Sparta, while Aristodemus, at the later Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, broke from his phalanx to seek death at Persian hands. Knowing that all were fated to die, Leonidas added one more condition for selection. Each man had to have a living male heir to continue his family line. It's also conceivable he wanted to personally assess the fortitude of the women who would be made widows. Leonidas himself fulfilled these conditions. His young wife, Gorgo, had borne him a son, Plisses, who would later become king following the regencies of Seumbrotus and Pausanias. As for Gorgo's own reaction to her husband's certain death, she showed her typical strength of character. In the high summer of 480 BC, Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, joined by about 1,000 Perioeci and another 1,000 non-combatant Hyads, began their march to Thermopylae. They first journeyed through the eastern Peloponnese, where around 4,000 more soldiers joined their ranks. Next, they crossed the Isthmus of Corinth and marched through Boeotia, a region that contributed only 400 Thebans and 700 Thespians. Finally, approximately 1,000 Paeotian and Elocrian fighters, the peoples most directly threatened by the Persian invasion, swelled the Greek army. In total, Leonidas commanded roughly 7,000 men to stand against a Persian force numbering nearly 200,000. Upon reaching Thermopylae, the Greeks set up camp by an old wall built by the Paeotians and reinforced it to bolster their defensive line. After several days of waiting, delayed by a storm that wrecked a portion of the Persian fleet off the Magnesian coast, King Xerxes delivered a final ultimatum to Leonidas: "Surrender your arms." The Spartan king's reply was terse and defiant: "Come and get them." Thus began one of history's most legendary battles, which would rage for 3 days of relentless combat. In his first assault, Xerxes sent his Median and Sessian forces against the Greeks. From the very first engagement, the tactical and equipment superiority of the dense Greek phalanx was clear. According to Herodotus, the Asians kept falling and being replaced by new troops, never ceasing in their effort despite suffering enormous losses. It was thus proven to the Persian monarch himself that while he had a multitude of combatants, very few were true warriors. Next, the Immortals, King Xerxes' own royal guard, took the offensive. However, the greater length of the Greek spears and the strategic maneuvers of the Lacedaemonians ensured they met the same fate. Frustrated by the setback, Xerxes commanded his fleet to engage the Aetolians and Aegianetans at Cape Artemisium, aiming to land troops behind the Greek position. But the Persian navy had not fully recovered from the storm-induced shipwreck, and the sea battle concluded with no decisive winner. At the close of the second day of fighting, as Xerxes grew desperate in the face of such unexpected defiance, a local man named Ephialtes betrayed the Greeks by revealing a hidden mountain path. This dishonorable act prompted one of King Leonidas's most noble gestures: his decision not to compel his allies to take part in the ensuing collective sacrifice. According to the most widely accepted account by historians, when the Persians learned of the Oenopiae path, which ascended the mountain and emerged behind the Greek rear guard, Leonidas permitted most of the allied Greek forces to retreat to their home cities, possibly believing they would be needed to defend their own lands later. The king stood his ground on the battlefield with his remaining Spartans, who were the majority, along with his Perioeci, the Hyad attendants, and the warriors from Chespi and Thebes. While the Spartans could not imagine returning alive from a lost fight, the Thespians and Thebans had their own compelling reasons to struggle until the very end. At sunrise on the third day of the battle, when Leonidas and his men learned of the Persian flanking maneuver via the Thermopylae path and knew their demise was imminent, they unleashed all their remaining strength against the barbarians, as Herodotus described, with reckless bravery. There came a point when most of their spears were shattered, yet they continued to slay Persians with their swords. Amidst this heroic struggle, Leonidas fell. A furious fight erupted over his body. The Greeks successfully retrieved it, forcing the enemy to fall back 4 separate times. But ultimately, when every last defender of the pass had perished, Xerxes came down from his throne and moved among the lifeless bodies. His rage against Leonidas was so great that he commanded his head to be severed and impaled on a pike. Many days later, after the Persian forces had departed, a Spartan party was able to reach Leonidas's body and chose to bury his now decomposed remains on that very spot. 40 years later, Sparta dispatched another unit to retrieve his bones, transport them back to the city, and give the hero a state funeral. Above his tomb, a stone slab was raised, inscribed with his name and those of the 300 Spartans who died with him. The Leonidion, a religious edifice built near the Acropolis, became the ceremonial heart of new annual religious festivals where Leonidas was venerated as a demigod hero. The outcome of the Battle of Thermopylae was staggering. Over 20,000 Asian soldiers, primarily elite units, perished during the 3-day clash. The Greeks exposed the vulnerability of Xerxes' army and fleet, and they began to believe in their own chances of victory. Without this inspirational stand, the naval triumph at Salamis a month later would not have been possible, nor would the final eradication of the Persian expedition on the plains of Plataea a year after. The resistance of Leonidas and his men in the narrow pass of Thermopylae thus stands as one of the most remarkable displays of courage, sacrifice, and resolve in human history. Their feat not only altered the course of the Greco-Persian Wars, but also signified a pivotal moment in the development of Western civilization.